Morgoth, master of the Balrogs, breeder of dragons, the first Dark Lord, once counted among the Valar, one of the greatest powers ever to walk the soil of Arda. And yet, there was a moment when Morgoth screamed for help. A moment when, had his Balrogs arrived a heartbeat too late, the Dark Lord himself might have been devoured, erased from the world he sought to dominate. So who, or what, could drive such terror into a being like Morgoth? Pull your blanket closer, find a quiet place for your thoughts. Tonight, we examine one of the most horrifying beings in Middle-earth, Ungoliant. But first, is Ungoliant truly a spider? Or is she something far more ancient and far more terrifying? Hello, this is ORCOLOGIST, specialist in magical creatures. 1. Was Ungoliant a spider? When Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee entered the lair of Shelob, they stepped into a nightmare. Silence, darkness, moist, foul air, webs layered upon webs, prey bound and hanging in patient cruelty. Had fate turned slightly against them, they would have perished in Shelob's venom. On screen, Shelob appears unmistakably spider-like. She builds a lair, spins webs, traps prey, injects venom, and consumes it. Aside from her immense scale, her behavior mirrors that of a terrestrial spider. But is that the whole truth? Long before Sauron ruled Mordor, Shelob already haunted those lands. She, maybe, was among the last children of Ungoliant. In The Two Towers, Tolkien describes her as an evil thing in spider form. Spider form. This suggests something crucial. The spider body may be a manifestation, not the essence. If Shelob is evil incarnate, wearing the shape of a spider, then what of her mother? In the Silmarillion, Ungoliant is described. In a ravine she lived, and took shape as a spider of monstrous form. Took shape. Like Shelob, Ungoliant appears not merely as a biological organism, but as a dark entity adopting a physical configuration. In Tolkien's cosmology, there is a consistent principle. Powerful spiritual beings descending into Arda must assume physical form and submit to its laws. Even the Valar abide by this. A Maya such as Gandalf, once Olorin, ages, tires and suffers within his mortal frame. Form imposes limitation. Therefore, Ungoliant, however primordial, however malevolent, would still be constrained by the biological logic of the body she chose. So yes, Ungoliant is, in form, a spider. But not a common spider, not an insect as we understand the term. In The Lord of the Rings, the evil arachnids of Mirkwood and Mordor are referred to as giant spiders, descendants of Ungoliant. By that classification, Ungoliant herself could be described as the original and most terrible of the giant spiders. A spider beyond scale, a spider beyond ecosystem, a spider whose hunger consumed light itself. And this leads us to the next question, perhaps the most unsettling one. If Ungoliant was truly giant, how could such a creature exist at all? 2. Body structure, alien. Let us begin with a simple scientific principle, the square cube law. As a creature grows larger, its volume, and therefore its weight, increases far faster than its surface area. We discussed this when analyzing dragons. But for spiders and insects, the limitation is even more severe. Spiders remain small for two primary reasons. First, their respiratory system. They do not possess lungs. Instead, they breathe through spiracles, tiny openings in the exoskeleton that channel oxygen into tracheae. Oxygen reaches tissues largely through passive diffusion. If the body becomes too large, Diffusion alone cannot deliver oxygen quickly enough to sustain life. Second, structural mechanics. An insect's exoskeleton bears its weight, but according to the square cube law, mass increases faster than the load-bearing capacity of that shell. At a certain size, the body collapses under its own gravity. By these laws, a creature like Ungoliant should not exist. And yet, she did. To prevent collapse, Ungoliant's body must have been composed of materials beyond the ordinary biological substances of Ada. In the Silmarillion, her origins are shrouded in uncertainty, but there is a haunting line suggesting that in ages long before, she descended from the darkness that lies about Ada. That darkness is the void. If Ungoliant emerged from the void, then she may not be constructed from the familiar organic chemistry of Middle-earth at all. She could be something fundamentally alien, not merely in temperament, but in material composition. Imagine her exoskeleton structured not from chitin, but from a super-bonded carbon lattice, akin to graphene, reinforced by crystalline minerals unknown to Ada. Such a structure could possess a strength-to-weight ratio hundreds of times greater than ordinary biological material. Its properties would not merely resist pressure, but transform it. Rather than being crushed by gravity, her shell could redistribute force across its lattice, maintaining internal stability even at colossal scale. But structure alone is insufficient. Respiration remains a problem. Ungoliant's favorite sustenance was not flesh, but light. She devoured the radiance of the two lamps. She drank the light of the two trees. Darkness followed her, not merely as shadow, but as consequence. What if her metabolism did not rely on oxygen at all? Imagine a system in which photons themselves were absorbed and converted directly into bioenergetic fuel. Instead of lungs and tracheae, each cell within her body could function semi-autonomously, drawing power from digested light. This would eliminate the diffusion bottleneck that limits insect size. In such a model, energy source, photonic absorption converted directly into biological energy. Cellular function. Each cell operates independently, nourished by stored radiance. Respiratory limitation, effectively bypassed. If these hypotheses hold, then Ungoliant's body was not merely larger than her descendants like Shelob, it was categorically different, superior, constructed on principles foreign to Middle-earth biology. And yet, there remains a complication. In Tolkien's cosmology, even monsters must obey the physical laws of Ada. Dragons require bones and musculature. Balrogs require internal energy systems to animate their mass. Ungoliant is a spider, and spiders do not possess internal skeletons. An exoskeleton, no matter how advanced, and an exotic metabolism would not alone explain how she lifted and carried her immense body, especially after she consumed the light of the two trees and swelled to monstrous proportion. So we are left with a final, unsettling question. Was there something else within her, some additional principle, some hidden structure that allowed the Void's daughter to move without collapsing under her own hunger? 3. The unlight spiderweb. To analyze a spider without speaking of its web is to leave the story half told. The ancient rule still stands. Where there is a spider, there is a web, and Ungoliant is no exception. In the ravine where she made her lair, webs veiled stone and shadow alike, weaving her black webs in a cleft of the mountains. The detail is small but decisive. Her webs were black. She dwelt in Avathar, a land perpetually smothered in darkness, so utterly lightless that even the radiance of the two sacred trees could not pierce it. In Quenya, Avathar itself whispers the meaning, darkness. One cannot help but imagine her threads spun so densely across ravine and cliff that they behaved like a cosmic phenomenon, a terrestrial black hole swallowing every wandering photon. If this hypothesis holds true, then even the question of Ungoliant's immense weight begins to resolve itself. Through a scientific lens, her webs were not mere hunting tools. They were instruments of environmental manipulation. Suspension structure. Perhaps Ungoliant did not fully stand upon the Earth at all. Enveloped in a field she generated, the phenomenon later known as unlight, she neutralized Arda's pull. Within this domain, she floated and crawled, as if moving through a medium she controlled, sparing her colossal limbs from unbearable strain. Ungoliant was known to produce this unlight, a devouring veil of absence. It allowed her and Morgoth to approach the two trees, unseen by the Valar. To all observers, there was no form, no outline, only a vast moving void. When the two trees were destroyed, Ungoliant and Morgoth fled across the frozen desolation of Helcaraxi, and once again the shroud of unlight enfolded them. If we imagine unlight as a hyperdense network of silk, then it may have functioned as both concealment and transport, a colossal rail system of shadow, allowing Ungoliant to glide like a sled over the grinding ice. The elves who later crossed Helcaraxi paid in blood and tears. Yet Ungoliant and Morgoth passed through with terrifying ease. But what made unlight silk different from ordinary spider silk? The answer is simple: everything. If common spider silk is protein-based, fibroin spun with biochemical precision, Ungoliant's unlight silk may have possessed a structure comparable to multi-layered carbon nanotubes, altered at the atomic scale by the primordial energy of the void itself. Superconducting core. At the center of each strand, a high-density band may have acted as a conduit for energy absorption, a channel through which light and heat were drawn inward. Light-absorbing coating, vantablack-like. The outermost layer likely bore microstructures akin to the real-world material, vantablack, trapping photons rather than reflecting them, neutralizing illumination entirely. Reverse fiber optic behavior. Where fiber optics transmit light, unlight silk devoured it. In regions of high density, the threads created a negative space, a zone impervious even to divine sight. Thus, Ungoliant's webs were more than architecture. They were propulsion, camouflage, sustenance, a light trap feeding an ever-growing hunger. The darkness of Avathar was not merely atmospheric, it was metabolic. She needed to move, she needed to feed, and light was her prey. And perhaps, hidden within this terrible lattice of unlight, lies the explanation for how Ungoliant once brought even Morgoth to his knees. 4. The power of unlight's web. I am no master of power scaling. Yet, through the framework we have built, the opening question of this video becomes clearer. Why was Morgoth so terrifying? Perhaps the truer question is this: why was Ungoliant even more so? At that time, Morgoth had dispersed much of his native power into the substance of Arda. He was diminished. Ungoliant, meanwhile, had consumed the light of the two trees and drunk from the wells of Varda. She expanded to a size and potency that made even the dark enemy tremble. In that moment, she was less a creature and more an overloaded biological engine, an organism operating beyond safe limits. According to the Silmarillion, her webs withstood the fire of the Balrogs, preventing Morgoth's escape. Absolute heat resistance. When the Balrogs lashed out with their whips of flame, the unlight web did not instantly ignite. Instead, it may have absorbed thermal energy, reinforcing its molecular bonds. Only the combined, concentrated assault of the entire Balrog legion could sever it. Quantum-level adhesion. This was no simple biological glue. Its grip may have relied on van der Waals forces, binding at the smallest scale of existence, atomic-scale adhesion-binding web to matter itself. To tear it free from Morgoth's body required energy of catastrophic magnitude. For a fleeting span of history, Ungoliant may have been the most powerful being in all of Arda, capable of challenging even the Valar. She might have carved out a dominion of her own, as dragons later would. Yet her fate was not triumph, but tragedy. And in that final unraveling, the greatest spider of Arda reminds us of a truth both mythic and scientific. A system that consumes without limit eventually collapses under the weight of its own hunger. 5. Ungoliant, the tragedy of hunger. In the Silmarillion, there is a line that reveals the very core of Ungoliant, desiring to be mistress of her own lust, taking all things to herself to feed her emptiness. This is not metaphorical hunger, not ambition, not envy. It is physical hunger. Ungoliant is always hungry. And if we dare to hypothesize that she was not a native creature of Arda, but something that crept in from the void beyond its walls, then her appetite may not be moral at all, but structural. Imagine within her a void core, a region of absolute deficit, colder than emptiness itself, a negative energy cavity embedded in living flesh. Now consider energy osmotic pressure. In physics, energy flows from higher states to lower ones. Water seeks the valley, heat seeks the cold. Likewise, the light of Arda, radiant, structured, alive, would be irresistibly drawn towards such a deficit. Ungoliant does not eat because she desires to. She eats because her very being is unstable within Arda's laws. Her essence leaks back into the void from which she came. To prevent dissolution, she must constantly replenish what is lost. Eating is survival, and here lies the tragedy. When she consumed the light of the two trees, her hunger did not diminish, it intensified. The more energy she absorbed, the larger she grew, but growth carries a cost. As her mass expanded, the energy required to sustain her body and maintain the vast lattice of unlight threads increased cubically. She entered a closed loop. She must eat to survive. But the more she eats, the more she must eat. Within that spiral, betrayal becomes not a choice, but a mathematical inevitability. Her turning against Morgoth was not sudden malice, it was thermodynamic destiny, and her end, according to the most widely accepted accounts, is unspeakably bleak. In the haunted vale of Nan Dungortheb, she devoured even her own offspring, and at last, herself. Her hunger never quieted. It devoured everything, including the source of its own continuation. Dragons fall and leave legends. Balrogs blaze briefly and vanish like sparks in a storm. Ungoliant's death was different. It was solitary. It was silent. It was self-inflicted by the very mechanism that sustained her. Under Tolkien's pen, Ungoliant becomes the embodiment of eternal, purely physical appetite. Though Tolkien disliked overt allegory, the image remains powerful. Unbounded consumption leads not to dominion, but annihilation. From a scientific perspective, if her body was indeed in constant structural decay, then eating was not only survival, it was purpose. She followed Morgoth because of eating. She betrayed Morgoth because of eating. She died because of eating. Every action revolved around the most primal imperative, and so, perhaps, Ungoliant had no concept of good or evil. A lion does not become evil for hunting an antelope. We do not condemn gravity for pulling a stone to earth. Ungoliant functioned according to her design, tragic, catastrophic, but not moral. Which raises a final question. If she had refused to consume the light of the two trees, would she still exist? Very likely, yes. She had endured for ages already, surviving by siphoning light through her webs. Had she refused Morgoth's offer, she might have lingered quietly into the Third Age. Ungoliant was no lesser being. She was intelligent. She hesitated. She feared the Valar. She understood risk. She made a choice, and Morgoth, cunning, persuasive, exploited the one vulnerability she could never silence: hunger. In the end, Ungoliant is not merely a monstrous horror lurking in darkness. She is a cosmic irony, a being who knew nothing beyond the act of consumption, and who was destroyed by the very instinct that kept her alive. And now, goodbye. This is the ORCOLOGIST.